What is going on here?
I'm repeating myself, and I'm going to have to say it again. I understand that sounds horrible.
Adam Neumann, the infamous CEO behind the company WeWork, was set to revolutionize the industry of working. Instead, fueled by greed and delusion, Adam led his company from a modest startup to a multi-billion-dollar company, and then suddenly watched everything crash down around him. From allegations of horribly mistreating staff to genuine startup tunnel vision, Adam fell into the trap of the cultish obsession with Silicon Valley entrepreneurs. He was on top of the world, and then he crashed. Hard. Now he's trying to claw his way back to success. But will it work in his favor, and has he really learned from his mistakes? Adam Neumann is from Tel Aviv, Israel, but only lived there for a short time before he and his family moved to the United States once his parents got divorced and his mother wanted to do her medical residency overseas. Then, after 4 years, they moved back to Israel, where he would live until he finished his mandatory military training with the Israeli Naval Academy. Once his conscription was completed, he decided to go to New York City to attend business school. Adam had always known that he wanted to be an entrepreneur, and he got his start by creating a clothing line for kids. The company itself flopped, and he abandoned it within a few years. In 2008, Adam noticed a niche on the heels of the stock market crash that left millions of people with job insecurity who were turning towards entrepreneurship as a form of stability. He and a colleague created the company Green Desk, which was a shared workspace business focused on sustainability. Basically, what that means is that they are glorified landlords who rent office spaces to individuals rather than leasing to whole companies, allowing business owners to work from an office instead of at home on their own companies. He had 2 buildings in New York that were doing exceptionally well, and he wanted to expand outwards, so he found investors with extremely deep pockets. By 2010, they had rebranded as WeWork, and because Neumann fit the bill of a quirky, driven visionary with a gift for salesmanship who would bring in millions for them all, investors practically lined up to give him money. His quirky personality kept investors from asking too many questions and fostered a tunnel vision of sorts that cared more about stock price increases rather than balance sheet results. On the heels of Apple revolutionizing business, it seemed that investors were more concerned with knowing that their stock was going up rather than seeing genuine profit increases on paper that pertain specifically to a rising success of the company. By the way, when I say quirky behavior, I mean it. Adam was an extremely lavish person, and despite touting sustainability, he went on tons of private jet flights, one of which he and his friends were doing so much, leafy green stuff while inside of a plane that the flight crew had to don oxygen masks just to continue working because of all of the smoke. Neumann became known for his excess and, well, his greed, honestly, and it only kept escalating. He became convinced that death was a technical issue that would be solved with time and science, and so he invested heavily in startup life science companies. He also continued to collect millions of dollars from investors to open up different WeWork offices around the world. He became a sort of Marie Antoinette-like figure, ordained with wealth and spending money like he breathes air, all while his company begins to show signs of crumbling around him. He would leave employees to clean up the mess he had created, and continually abandoned other staff members who were starting to notice inconsistencies in the company itself. He was often completely impossible to get a hold of. Quote, sometimes he would abandon them upon landing at an airport for meetings, leaving staffers to find their own way home. This mirrored his behavior on land too. Adam would meet with staff and even interview prospective employees while riding around in his super luxury car costing more than $200,000. Then, when he was done, tell them to get out and ride in a separate car in his convoy. All of these insane and wasteful details in Adam and his wife's life are so hypocritical when you look at the business they had built themselves as. The WeWork company was founded on the principles of environmentalism and sustainability. Meanwhile, the CEO and his wife lived in a multi-million-dollar mega mansion, all while touting eco-friendly lifestyles to which they were not holding themselves accountable for. The Neumanns also treated their employees like serfs. The office was routinely trashed from weekend parties, and employees would come in on Monday morning expecting to pick up after the CEO and his friends. Everyone had the expectation of having to clean up for Adam and his friends, whether it be hop on a flight at a moment's notice to meet him where he is, or to work insane hours at a time just to make up for the slack of an absentee CEO. Then in 2018, cracks in the company definitely started to show. WeWork faced a lawsuit from a former employee who identified issues of inappropriate behavior specifically to the women in the office by both Adam and other employees. In her lawsuit statement, she accused Neumann of plying her, quote, with shots during her interview with the company. Shortly after the lawsuit came to light, WeWork created a policy that its employees could only drink 4 beers per day at the office instead of the unlimited amount previously. I love how that's just a normal thing to say for this company instead of completely insane. I would literally never get any work done. Then in August 2019, his extravagant lifestyle and greed finally caught up to him. WeWork attempted to become an IPO, which basically means opening their stock to the public to drive up value. WeWork directors were extremely concerned about Neumann's lifestyle looking bad on the company if it went public, and they were planning on asking him to step down as CEO, quote, after a tumultuous week in which his eccentric behavior and substance use came to light. After Adam got wind of this planned takedown, he took $700 million out of the company, and basically, by staging a coup, the directors kicked him out as CEO and replaced him. But not really staging a coup, because they let him keep the money and paid him $192 million cash to walk away. While that is an insane amount of money, after he stepped down, Neumann was dropped from the Forbes billionaire list. For the rest of 2019 and basically up until now, WeWork has tried and kind of failed a little bit to recover from its reputation as a hypocritical greenwashing company that allows its greed-driven CEOs to run off the rails. Meanwhile, Adam is attempting to make a comeback to the entrepreneurial world. In 2022, he started buying apartment buildings in New York, and it's estimated that he owns approximately $1 billion worth of real estate in his some 4,000 apartments. For an interview done in March 2022, he also expressed wanting to rejoin the business side. Quote, to be an entrepreneur, you have to regularly make decisions on the spot. And to be successful, you have to, over time, make more right decisions than you did wrong, actually a lot more right. And the higher the growth of the business, the faster you move, the tougher it is to do. But the longer you practice, just like surfing over time, the better you get at it. So you fall on surfing and then you get up and do it again, and you just do it a little bit better. Adam states he plans on shifting to residential sectors rather than commercial. The median age of a home buyer in the US has grown from 31 in the 80s to now almost 50 years old. He's attempting to make home building more accessible to young people who are so often pushed out by an impossible market. Although it seems to just be in the talking stages, and I can't quite seem to find a direction that Adam specifically wants to head in, it's just that it's kind of an idea he's hoping to achieve. Quote, we started by buying this real estate, and then I started walking the buildings, just feeling, and it feels like there's so much more that could be done to make tenants' lives better. In regards to his previous scandals, Adam stated about this new direction, quote, I think what's beautiful about the new story is that it is a progression and a consequence of the old story. I don't know if it's a model, but a thought that guided me is that if we take everything that happened as a lesson and we celebrate the great, we learn from whatever it is we can learn from, and then apply it as we move forward into the future, then it's extremely beneficial. That being said, there has been no improvement when it comes to Adam's lifestyle. He still lives extravagantly and prioritizes fun over business, which I think, for someone attempting to be back at the helm of such a large corporation, is not a good thing. I think that as long as Adam continues to be as greedy and selfish as we've seen him in the past, this new business is just as likely to crash and burn as his others, no matter how persuasive he can be.
This is what happens when you work to change things, and first they think you're crazy, then they fight you, and then all of a sudden you change the world.
Notorious scammer Elizabeth Holmes was once the youngest self-made female billionaire. Then, in the blink of an eye, her company was worthless and she lost it all. Being heralded as, quote, the next Steve Jobs, to now finding herself facing serious criminal charges and decades in prison. Elizabeth Holmes was considered a hero, but when investors started to catch on that she built her empire almost entirely based on a lie. That lie found Elizabeth guilty of 4 out of 11 charges of fraud, wherein she could face up to 20 years in prison when she is officially sentenced. And now the Hulu series The Dropout, based on a podcast detailing the case, is widely spreading Holmes's lies and deception, giving it more publicity than ever. Elizabeth Holmes was born to be a fraudster. Her own dad went bankrupt after being accused of an accounting fraud scandal where they, using accounting loopholes, hid billions of dollars in debt from failed projects and dealings. Elizabeth came from some seriously old money. Her third great-grandfather founded the world's biggest yeast production company, and both her parents were involved in congressional politics and international trade. Holmes herself was creating and selling program-based businesses while she was still in high school. She learned how to speak Mandarin Chinese, and only partway through high school did she already begin attending Stanford University's summer Mandarin program. When she graduated high school, she attended Stanford, where she studied chemical engineering and worked as a student researcher and lab assistant in the School of Engineering, all within her freshman year. Her interests lay in laboratory research and medical engineering, and by the end of her freshman year, she was studying SARS. This laboratory research involving SARS sparked an interest in collection of blood samples through the use of syringes. She filed her first patent for an invention she had created, which was a wearable drug delivery patch, and a year later, she took the plunge and decided to drop out of university and use her tuition money to fund her consumer healthcare technology company. The name of this company was Real-Time Cures, set to, quote, democratize healthcare. The beginning of her company, she would later state, was inspired by her fear of needles, wherein she became interested in performing blood tests using only a minute amount of blood. When she first proposed the idea to a professor at Stanford, he said it was impossible, but she eventually convinced him to back her idea. She later renamed the company Theranos, a combo of the words therapy and diagnosis. A year after the creation of the company, it had raised $6 million in funding before even releasing a product or prototype. By the end of 2010, she had $92 million. By the end of 2014, Theranos was valued at $9 billion and had raised more than $400 million in venture capital. Elizabeth was on top of the world. She featured on Forbes magazine as the world's youngest female self-made billionaire, and she featured on the Forbes 400. She was praised for, quote, this phenomenal rebooting of laboratory medicine, for her revolutionary idea of only using a few drops of blood in lab testing. But that's exactly what it was, just an idea. In 2015, a Wall Street journalist was tipped off about the fishiness of the whole operation. A medical expert who thought the experiments were off asked him to speak to a few ex-employees who became eventually whistleblowers. It wouldn't be long, however, before Elizabeth found out about the probe into her company, and she decided to launch a campaign to stop the journalist from publishing his findings. She threatened him legally and financially, but despite her threats, the journalist published the piece. He detailed the company's experiments, how the prototype they were touting around gave extremely inaccurate results, and how the results they had been promoting that came from the prototype actually came from commercially available blood sample machines. Elizabeth Holmes denied all the accusations and called the Wall Street Journal a tabloid. She appeared on television the night that article was posted and stated, quote, this is what happens when you work to change things. First they think you're crazy, then they fight you, and then all of a sudden you change the world. Then the trouble really started for Holmes. In 2016, a few months after the article was published, Elizabeth was caught operating a lab that had faulty equipment and used unsafe procedures. The findings meant that she was banned for 2 years from owning, operating, or directing a blood testing service. Although Theranos appealed the decision, Walgreens terminated their relationship with the company, and the FDA ordered the company to cease making its blood collecting device because it was both dangerous and didn't work. Then the lawsuits started cropping up. Elizabeth's company was ordered to repay all the consumers who bought all of her products in the state of Arizona under false pretenses that they actually worked. She ended up having to shell out $4.65 million to Arizona alone. 99% of Theranos shareholders basically partially backed out, and in 2018, both Holmes and her former president Ramesh Balwani were officially charged with fraud. Now, something to know about Ramesh. Her and Elizabeth had an epic love affair. He is 20 years her senior, and the two had met while she was in college at Stanford. Their relationship was super toxic, however, and Balwani was known as a bully around the office, often tracking his employees' whereabouts and outing them if he deemed them to be too unproductive. Eventually, he and Elizabeth broke up in 2016 when the company was starting to downturn and got into legal trouble, and she pushed him out of the presidential position. A lot of people, once the case had garnered insane media attention, were shocked as to why it had been allowed allowed to go on for so long. A lot of it had to do with how obsessed Elizabeth was with security. She had security guards stay with each visitor throughout the entire time that they were in the Theranos building, and they even reportedly escorted them to bathrooms. She also only signed deals with companies on the condition that they absolutely do not reveal any information about the deal with anyone else. That means that she got to rack up an insane amount of money because companies weren't talking to each other about how much they were giving Elizabeth. So by 2018, Elizabeth and Balwani, along with the company as a whole, were charged with massive fraud by the SEC, and she had to agree to give up financial and voting control of the company, pay $500,000, and return almost 20 million shares of Theranos stock. She also isn't allowed to be a director of any publicly traded company for a whole decade. Despite all this, she stayed CEO of Theranos because it's a private company, but only a few months later, she would step down as CEO on the same day that she and Balwani were charged with 9 counts of wire fraud and 2 counts of conspiracy to commit wire fraud. All while her company is burning around her, Elizabeth is on social media touting her new boyfriend and new puppy. She's now dating the heir to a fancy hospitality company. And author Nick Bilton posted about it on Twitter, stating, quote, "I personally find it crazy that she's being charged with 11 felony counts, thousands of people's lives were harmed, and she's as happy as can be." Now, after being charged in January and facing up to 20 years in prison, we're not sure when she'll be officially sentenced, but it seems pretty likely that she'll face some amount of jail time, at least if just to prove a point. Her and her boyfriend Will Evans used to live in a $5,000 a month apartment in San Francisco. Although no one's sure where they live now, I can't imagine it's going to be a normal apartment. It's been reported that she and her boyfriend got married in 2019, but no one's really sure because the wedding was allegedly super private, which is very on brand for Elizabeth. Her trials only took so long too because of the worldwide thingy that happened in 2020. Otherwise, she would have been sentenced way sooner given how serious fraud charges are taken in the US. And in 2021, Elizabeth also gave birth to a baby with her boyfriend, so there's that too, I guess. So as it stands now, she's facing 20 years in prison, a fine of $250,000, and is required to possibly pay each and every one of her victims restitution, which could add up to millions of dollars. But we won't know what her actual penalty will be yet until the sentencing, which hasn't been set.